Hello friends, my name is Real Emile. Now the Aston Martin Vantage originally launched in 2005 with a V8 engine which produced 380 horsepower. The basic idea of the Vantage was for it to be the baby Aston, an almost sports car if you will. This put it directly into the competition of cars like the Porsche 911 and the BMW 6 Series. In 2009 Aston Martin decided to go completely mad and give it the engine from the DBS, which was a V12 which produced over 510 horsepower. In 2013 they launched this, the Vantage S. Now the Vantage S has some slight modifications on it, and as a result it now produces 565 bhp, which is an awful lot for a small car like this. This has made it the standout Aston track racer, despite its small size, which might not be quite as impressive as, say, the Vanquish. As I said earlier though, this has definitely pushed it into the lines of some of the more track-ready Porsches, and this is the ultimate track-ready Porsche. This is the GT3 RS 4 litre. This was the final 997. Now, the car was pretty much a GT3 RS, but with its engine up to 4 litres in capacity. This meant it produced 500 horsepower, a nice round figure for you there, while still maintaining the drivability of the previous GT3 RS. So the question is very simple: which one of these cars is a better vehicle? And I do have to say, on looks, the Aston Martin definitely takes it. However, what do they actually like to, say, drive or live with? Let's find out. To find out first, let's take a quick look at stats. We start with the Aston Martin V12 Vantage S. This car will do 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds, which is rather hasty. It has a 0 to 100 time of 8.8 seconds, weighs 3,671 pounds, so it's fairly heavy, and has a top speed of 214 miles an hour. As previously mentioned, it has 565 brake horsepower and 457 pounds-feet of torque. The brakes aren't bad either, with it stopping from 60 to 0 in 137 feet, or 100 to 0 in just shy of 326 feet. Noise-wise, this vehicle does make a very nice noise from that V12. Obviously, it's an Aston Martin V12, it was going to be the best in the business. It is a 6-litre V12, which is definitely a big engine for a very, very small car, so it should be interesting to see how it handles. The Porsche 911, on the other hand, has even better stats than the Aston Martin. It has a 0 to 60 time of 3.6 seconds and a 0 to 100 time of 8 seconds. As previously mentioned, it has 500 brake horsepower and 339 pounds-feet of torque, which isn't as much as the Aston. However, it does weigh a lot less than the Aston, at just shy of 3,000 pounds. It has a top speed of 201.7, which is very impressive when you consider the amount of downforce on this vehicle. It has even better brakes than the Aston, stopping dead in 119 feet from 60 and 285 feet from 100 miles an hour. Sound-wise, that flat 6 just doesn't produce quite the same note as the V12 does, and the V12 is a much better sounding vehicle. However, thanks to its inline 6 and due to the fact Porsche has spent many years refining this, it is a truly excellent engine, the inline 6 now featured in the modern Porsche 911. I started by taking the Aston Martin for a scenic drive through the hills, and I was actually pleasantly surprised. While it may sound like 565 horsepower in a car this small does sound like a recipe for disaster, it actually turns out the V12 Vantage is an extremely nice car to drive. It's very balanced. It's almost strange. It doesn't have too much turning grip, or rather it doesn't turn into the corners too hastily. However, it turns in just fast enough for it not to cause understeer. And it also means that it's not very jolty or twitchy. This made the vehicle an absolute blast down these scenic roads, and that V12 really does supply the power to get you down it very, very quickly. The brakes, as I had discussed, are pretty much excellent, although obviously not as good as the Porsches as the statistics would lead you to believe. Overall, I found the Aston on its scenic drive to be a very, very good car, and you can actually kick the back end out and it to be fairly controllable. This means that, in my opinion, for this scenic drive, there is no other car which can really compete with this. Although the F-Type may be more fun, the V12 is definitely more composed, and will probably become my new car for just simply cruising about. A joyful experience indeed. I then proceeded to take the Porsche for a spin, and it's kind of obvious what this car's set up for. It's obviously a circuit racer. I mean, look at all this look at all the aero parts. To drive, you can definitely tell this. The turning is extremely quick and it's very precise. It almost just darts from direction to direction with a simple thumbstick movement. This makes the car extremely good when it comes to the corners, and that back end, thanks to that rear wing, definitely doesn't come out. The GT3 RS is one of the most grippy Porsches available, and you can certainly tell 50 years hard at work by the Porsche engineers to get that rear end tamed has definitely worked out for the better. I do have to say though, this car does have a rather big issue with twitching. Obviously because the engine is in the back, it means the rear end can be a bit more twitchy and it will just twitch out in corners. This is why on the Scenic Drive I much preferred the Aston Martin, as it was a much more relaxing car to drive and you didn't have to be as much on edge as you did in the Porsche. I then took both of the cars to a test track in order to see what the cars would be really like during some track racing, and the Aston Martin went first. Now the Aston Martin, you could tell on this track, was definitely more of a cruiser car. It doesn't quite have the same amount of turning speed as you'd really like from a track racer. However, it is just enough to make the car extremely pleasant to drive. Sure, it doesn't quite have the same turning speed as, I don't know, a Dodge Viper ACR, but this isn't a track ready car. This is more of a cruiser turned more into a track racer car. That being said, this Aston Martin handles better than any other Aston Martin I've ever driven on a racetrack and was fully enjoyable on this track. I did however miss the GT3 RS's brakes at some certain points, as this car, while it does get stopped extremely well, is not quite as good as the GT3 RS at getting stopped. However, around the track it was very capable. Through corners though, the weight definitely plays a big role. Now, you can't quite take the same amount of speed through corners as you could in many other track cars, and there was some close brushes with that wall for example. You can really feel the weight when you drive it around here, which is something you don't want to do. However, the Aston Martin was definitely not horrible around this track, and I fully enjoyed driving it. It is probably one of the best handling cars in Horizon 2, as that back end just does not let go. So if you want, it's not really a hot lapper, but if you want a pleasant track driving experience, I highly recommend this Aston Martin V12 Vantage to take round the track. While track racing may not be the Aston Martin's priority, for the Porsche it's specifically set up for this, and you can really tell this car can absolutely muller a track. This car was a lot of fun to drive around here. The turning is just immense. The amount of speed you can take through these corners is fantastic. This has got a very, very grippy back end, as I said before, and this is probably one of the best handling cars in Horizon 2, just like the Aston Martin. Although twitchiness did come into play a little bit, I was finding that around the track, that the Porsche's back end is a little bit twitchy. Now I'm sure with some tuning the back end could surely be settled, and with that you'd have an absolutely superb track racing vehicle. Obviously the Porsche was a bit quicker around the track than the Aston Martin was, by about 2 seconds. However, that's not really surprising considering the Porsche has about 50 PI more than the Aston Martin. While on the subject of PI, we should talk about price. The Aston Martin costs 166,500 credits, which is an awful lot. However, this Porsche is even more. 180,000 credits buys you the GT3 RS 4 litre, which is double the price of a Corvette Z01. Now, as much as I do like the Corvette Z06, the Porsche is a lot more grippier, but I'm not really sure it's worth double the price of the Corvette. And with some mods, the Corvette could pretty much get to reasonably the same levels of grip as this Porsche. The Corvette for me is just the better value for money, And that's what makes me feel this Porsche might just be a little bit too much money to justify buying it. And that's why we come back to the Aston Martin. Because the Porsche is such a track-based car, during a scenic drive it just isn't quite as nice to drive as the Aston Martin. And while on the track it is extremely good, I feel cars that are a bit cheaper than it could probably do just as well as the Corvette. Hell, a Ferrari 458 isn't too much more than that Porsche. That being said though, the Porsche is a fantastic car, but for me, my choices are the Aston. It looks fantastic, it drives superbly, and there is simply no other car in Horizon 2 which I think is more fitting to what this game's all about. Nice, scenic drives across beautiful landscapes. Anyway friends, my name's been TheRealEmile. This has been a long awaited review return because I haven't done one of these in ages, so I hope you did enjoy. And until next time, farewell.